about what the farmers are doing and being involved in that whole community of people that really just give a crap about compassion and care. And so I want to make sure I have a good angle here. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. So definitely going to spend a little bit more time this week not working out of a book. I think that, we did a lot in going over what the diagnosis is last week that they talk about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, and I think I would like to just spend a little bit of time talking about it and then talk about my take on it. So, I just had a conversation with somebody earlier about this, another cannabis patient, and it's always a good reminder for me when I have these conversations because I don't I don't always have the words at the front of my mind when I'm hosting this. And I try to I prepare myself for it, but I don't write like a script or anything. So I try to be as genuine as I can in sharing what I know and what I've learned. So for me, this has been a new venture, a new exploration, a scientific experiment, I guess you could call it. So what I was talking about with this young lady was about some of the misconceptions about the Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I wanted to start by saying that whatever people have adapted this to, and just to kind of give credit to adaptively using a piece of literature, I mean, literally the existence of the Narcotics Anonymous program was an adaptation of the Alcoholics Anonymous literature to something that it was not written or intended to be used for, right? And so there really is not a scientific basis to use that literature in that way. And while it does work for some people, it's not supported by evidence of what works for most people. So it's very interesting that there would be any pushback at all about using the literature in any other way that could be supported by scientific evidence. And I think the founders of the program would probably be inclined to support, moving the program into some sense of adherence with current scientific understanding, because I think that's what they were trying to do at the time when the book was written, back in the 1920s and 30s, and as it continued to be revised, new stories were added to reflect new populations that weren't represented in the book. But the book was really strictly written for and by middle-aged, privileged white men, and not necessarily the working class poor, but the educated. The people who had the ability to read a book with advanced understandings, interpret that book with advanced understandings, and then apply them. Right? So it wasn't something that was created for everybody to use. And it's certainly not the way that it's used today. But what it was a starting point. It was a starting point to try to get at an understanding of what this thing was that people were dealing with, and how did they come back from that. Because up until a certain point, up until people realized like what the natives had started doing with the red road, and that started this journey towards the evolution of the 12 steps, that the people who were considered to be alcoholic were considered to be incurable human beings. They were doomed. They were consigned to a doomed existence. They would suffer from insanity and then be treated in the traditional methods of treatment for insanity, which included frontal lobotomy at that time. There was a legitimate reason to fear. There was a legitimate reason to fear the the treatment community, and there was a legitimate reason to fear the public and the backlash and the response. And so a lot of the elements of protectiveness and concealment and the history are largely around trying to protect protect the people that they were trying to help, and bringing these people together, much like bringing together groups of drug addicts. I found a similar concern and a similar concealment and a similar response to establishing drug user unions. And that's something I've invested a lot of my time and my effort in doing, to get people to be comfortable to come out of the shadows and advocate for their own rights, and to change some of our landscape, our political landscape and our social landscape. And that requires a lot of bravery and courage. And a lot of these folks really just need some support and some healing. And we weren't really getting at that when we were lobotomizing people. I really don't think that was the answer. So this was a better answer than lobotomy. To just to put it in a frame of reference in its historical time period, those were legitimately the options. I mean, yeah, you might get put on sedatives for a while, but the sedatives did very little to um, initiate a recovery or to diminish problematic drinking use. And so the physicians were relatively powerless to deal with this thing. They just did not know what they were dealing with. So I think it's really important to recognize that when we talk about certain literatures and things within them, that I always try to put it into context and to try to understand where people were at that time and what was going on and why did they speak the way that they spoke. What did they mean? What did those words mean in 1920s America versus 2020s America, which is roughly where we're approaching. And so in 100 years, a lot of things can happen, right? From the development of the steamship in the 1800s to the 1900s development of the automobile. And now we have spacecraft and aircraft and all kinds of things. So it's a drastically different world that we're talking about now. And certainly the landscape of use has changed significantly. There's a wider availability of diversity in drugs. There is a larger marketplace. We've moved away from the type of marketplace that functions or focuses on local economy. There's a strong emphasis on globalism. As globalism's expanded, the need to increase shipping capacity and processing has continued to go up. Keeping costs low has always been a priority so people can't scam packages and do the kinds of things that would prevent drugs from being shipped around various parts of the globe. And it's not sensible to do it. Taxpayers and consumers don't want to bear those additional cost burdens. And so what is the most sensible route to address those things, right? And so this is a lot of the discourse of public, drug policy, trying to figure out how to deal with these things. And a big step in a particular direction, I'm not going to say it's necessarily the right direction, but a particular direction that a lot of people believe is the right direction, has been to move towards recognizing medical use of cannabis and then regulating and legalizing cannabis, which are two different things in my opinion. I don't know exactly how I feel about full market regulation. I don't think it's necessarily the wrong idea. I think the how is the really important question. How do we do it? How do we do it responsibly? And certainly for patients, we wouldn't want to create something that would diminish the legitimacy of somebody's medical use of cannabis, which is different than recreational use. And so I think that as we move towards recreational use, there's been a tendency or desire to kind of bring the dispensary system and just open it up, becoming the commercial facility, right? But what that does is it further blurs the boundary between medical cannabis patients who should be receiving medical counseling, who should be, you know, receiving ongoing consultation, who should have access to educated professionals in dispensary settings. I really like the Connecticut model of the dispensaries, not necessarily the grow laws, but the dispensaries. Being able to have products that are rigorously quality controlled, that they can tell you, break down all the individual terpene profiles of those specific plants. They can tell you what the specific terpenes can do or what benefits they can contribute towards. You can sit down with a licensed pharmacologist and get a consultation from somebody who has an understanding of the medicine, and they can help guide you towards the strain or the genetic makeup of a plant that will provide you the maximum benefit with the lowest dose. And so this is where we get into some of the practices. We talk about, we got a diagnosis. So if we figured out that we have some level of problematic use, whether it's alcohol or other drugs, for whatever reason, it's led us to a place where we're now seeking recovery from that, but also for whatever reason might be, we're making use of the medical cannabis program. And that can be for any number of reasons, whether it's for chronic pain, whether it's for symptom management for post-traumatic stress disorder, whether it's for rheumatoid arthritic conditions, whether it's for some level of glaucoma in patients. We can go down a whole laundry list of conditions. But for whatever reason, there happens to be a co-prevalence where there's a need for recovery and there's a need for medical treatment. And this is where we find ourselves. Um, the message of hope that I like to share with people, and the reason why I started this group, is that you can indeed have and do both. You can be in a lifestyle of recovery, focusing on continually improving your global health. And, I work my hardest to continue to live to do that and to inspire that in others. I spend my days like today after having lunch with a friend who lost a family member. I get to come home and I have these awesome test strips that I can help people test their drugs so they don't die from them. So I have these show up at my door. So now I'm packing up test kits to bring with me to go share with people and teach them how to not die from drugs. I think that's a pretty recovery oriented activity. The 12 steps talks about, you know, uh, having a commitment to service and continuing that ongoing service, being part of the 12 step and kind of jumping right through it, right to the 12, which is where I spend a lot of my life today, continuing to keep myself accountable and honest, is that, I do a lot of service work. And service work has helped to give me purpose in my life. And whether or not I follow the 12 steps, you just take that element out. Let's take the step part out of the equation because there's a lot of stigma that people are resistant to thinking about the 12 steps because of all the negative other things to unpack around it. But let's just talk about what underneath that is helpful, and it's having purpose. Having something in your life where you have a commitment, you're doing something to help other people, which makes you feel better about yourself. It does, for whatever reason it does, and you have something to occupy your time. You're not sitting around like, oh, woe is me, getting wrapped up in your emotions, getting stuck in your head. When you got things going on in front of you and you got things to do, it's impossible to be stuck in your head, or very, very difficult to be stuck in your head. You got to really have some serious things going on to be stuck in your head. And there's a few disclaimers that I want to put out there too, because this also has come up. There's been, several instances where folks have been struggling with some sort of emotional disturbance, and in dialogue it comes out that they have a form of bipolar disorder. And it's important to note that cannabis itself does have psychoactive components. So for patients that have particular vulnerability in their mental health, it's really, really important to utilize the medical system to its fullest extent. Make sure you're getting screened by your doctor, that you're getting regular primary care, that you're consulting with your physician, talking about your experiences with the medication, that you're honest, and that you're getting these visits, and especially if you're first starting the program, frequently. And I would strongly suggest that for folks that have complex mental health, that the more complex the mental health, I would say the more compelled you should be to seek additional, external supervision while transitioning onto any new type of medication. It doesn't even have to just be cannabis, but particularly for cannabis with mental health patients, because there are some risks. We don't generally talk about them because they're relatively minimal for the vast majority of the population. But prime example, a friend of mine, somebody who's close to me, has bipolar disorder, and they take regular medication. But for whatever reason, when they smoke cannabis, this individual who really enjoys smoking cannabis has their medication completely and utterly disrupted by it. To the tune where they will enter a manic state in a very short period of time. I mean, we're talking like one dose and that's it. They're off in a manic state. Once they hit that state, they've convinced themselves that all they need is the cannabis, not the medication. This continues to spiral. This has happened not once, but multiple times since the time I've known this person. So it's not like some freak accident or, there's something with the medication. I've seen this replicated with other people in this condition, like a large number of people in this condition. So I generally tend to tell people, particularly if you have something like a bipolar disorder, you know, use extra caution, use your support system, talk to the people around you about what they're experiencing, and don't discard that. You know, try to resist the urge, and it is particularly difficult in mania because it's easy to become convinced that you know everything and that you're invincible, and it becomes very complicated to reason in that state. But if you find yourself sliding into that, be aware of the risk. Awareness is a big part of being able to do proper management. Having awareness of it, so if somebody does, and having a good support system, so ideally somebody does engage you early on, you have enough awareness about you and a willingness to receive that information to be able to take that feedback and go back to your doctor and talk about it, talk about what you can do different. Now, there are other alternatives within the spectrum of medical cannabis that are far less risky, like CBD. And while they may not help with as much of the emotional regulation that some of the regular cannabis does, what I have found is that it does help with a lot of the other stuff, the chronic pain, the inflammation. And so there are other ways of accessing some of the components of medical cannabis that can be really beneficial without necessarily taking on all of those additional risks. So there it is. I do want to talk for a little bit about what it's been like for me since I stopped drinking and becoming a cannabis patient, and what that journey's been like a little bit. And then, I'm probably going to end early this week. I really want to invite people to ask questions and to maybe propose some topics and things that are kind of stirring them that they're wanting to see be talked about through this group. So, just to kind of get into a short story before I let you guys go. Um, when I was first trying to, excuse me, I suddenly got sniffly. So, as I was first going through the journey to stop drinking alcohol this last time, um, I had come from a place where I was managing recovery residences. I was, volunteering at the local shelter. I was helping out with the local harm reduction coalition. This was, oh gosh, probably about 7, maybe 8 years ago, starting. So right around that time frame, that winter, between 7 and 8 years ago, um, I lost a girlfriend, and I discovered her. It was something that I'll probably never forget. I remember meeting her father for the first time, and her father shook my hand, and he didn't even know who I was. He didn't know I was her boyfriend, and I didn't really feel the need to tell him. It was really awkward, and I was there with the police, and I had to wait till the police left, because they had to, examine the body, make sure there's no foul play, all that kind of stuff. So then they left, and I was just numb. And so I just kind of went down to the gym. I walked down to the gym. I didn't live too far from my gym, and I was working out. And I worked out for hours. Didn't feel like any time at all went by. I was just in like a daze. I remember a guy stopped me and he said something to me, and I just kind of looked at him. And they stopped, and he started talking to me, and it was just really hard to connect with people with all that was going on. So, so I wound up drinking. Long story short, and I didn't stop drinking for a while. And I was going through a legal battle with the court system, and kind of a result of that was to do some drug court and do this treatment. And thankfully, as I was going through this, I was also faced with a set of consequences at the school, which were not particularly helpful. And some of these things kind of fed into each other. like the negative consequences actually led me to drink more, which led to more consequences, which led me to drink more. So I was having a really hard time breaking out of that cycle. And then on top of that, there was this like bizarre series of events where I would swear off drinking and then find myself in a package store and not understand why I had already purchased alcohol. It would happen so fast that I just couldn't figure it out. And I wasn't using cannabis at the time, but I couldn't stop drinking. And so I got myself into a partial hospitalization program because I really wanted to stay in school. That was not ultimately what ended up happening. I did not. That choice was taken from me. So they threw me out of school, but I was doing this partial hospitalization program, and I met some folks there that introduced me to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd never been to it before in my life. I'd never even tried it. I'd always found my recovery through cannabis. So I figured I'd go down there and I'd see what it was about. And I met a really good group of people. I ended up finding a really good sponsor who was really accepting of me being a cannabis patient. And I talked to him quite a bit about it. And, we took a break for a um, while I was doing the drug court program because that was like really intensive and they didn't really leave me a lot of time to do anything, never mind go to meetings. So I did that. And I was very lucky that I started the process before that because I watched so many people around me fail out of this drug court program, and it was terrible. And I could tell, like, it was people going through what I went through in the first 6 months of trying to stay sober, which was mostly not staying sober, but just failing and feeling like a piece of shit and beating myself up and going back the next day and doing it all over again. And, I just kept at it. I kept at it. I kept at it. And eventually I started to have some successes. They weren't like, I was willing to celebrate going one night without drinking at that point. So it was like that was a big achievement for me. And so one week turned into a couple days, and I didn't beat myself up over the relapses. And I think that was a big part of why I was able to continue because I wasn't like all or nothing at that point. If I would have started that at the court, I'm not sure that would have been the case because they were definitely all or nothing, and there was no in between. And I don't think I would have found that helpful. I probably wouldn't be where I am now. But luckily, I had it, pretty well under my thumb by the time I got into the drug court program. And so I did really well in the drug court program. They actually helped me to get through my college to get my social work degree. Um, and so I left there with high honors, but really it was just I had started this work long before I had started the drug court program. So by the time I got out and I got back to my sponsor, he walked me through the steps, and I learned a lot about myself from that process. And I'm going to take a lot of what I learned from him to inform what I do now. Him and another sponsor who were both openly accepting of me being a medical cannabis patient and not pushing abstinence as the pathway to recovery, but just one part of or one type of recovery, but just really being genuinely accepting of where I was at and helping me to work the steps anyway. And I think that's been a big influence on why I continue to say, like, I'm okay with using some of it because the way that I used it wasn't like how most people probably have experienced. And I recognize that. I want to, like, be able to share that with other people because I think that a big part of my healing was just being able to kind of lay it all on the table with somebody and just say, yeah, it's okay, man. Like, it's okay. Like, we all have to do what we need to do in order to survive in this world, in this life. And we all have different things we have to deal with. And one of mine happens to be, some conditions that are best treated with cannabis because I can't deal with taking the opiates. It's just not a good choice for me. So I find myself thinking back on that and just kind of like that whole serendipitous adventure, going off of the going on to the regular medications and having the drug court checking my levels and the drug tests were always stressful even though I wasn't using anything. It was still stressful. They had like 3 tests within that year that came back with false positives, and I got grilled and I got given all kinds of crap. And thank God I had a pretty secure recovery behind me at that point, a good support system on top of that, that it didn't send me back out because it easily could have. And I found myself, where I was able to challenge those, and I was found that it was a faulty result on those tests. So that it was finally at the end of that program that the drug court doctor herself was the one that actually placed me back into the cannabis program. And I went into the court, and it's hard to say this without getting tears in my eyes, but the judge that had convicted me on my first offense and was hearing my release for the drug court for this offense, and they were talking, and the lawyer shared my story, and they shared what they learned about me from the program. I had told them when I came through the first time, I said, the world I live in is different. People don't live this way. There's other ways that people live, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I told them about my artistry and my music career, my passions, and the things I was involved with, and what I was trying to do. And it was just so radical to see how in just a number of years between the first time I went to court, I got convicted and sent to prison, and the second time I went to court, and they went through my whole story again, and the judge apologized to me. And God bless this man for not having too much pride. And he thanked me for giving them my patience and for allowing them to learn from me. And I think that was just such a gift because I had never thought of me interacting with the court or going to the court as a process where, it's very much a situation where you feel like people are there to put their power over you and they're going to, do whatever. And this was something so radically different because I felt like over that year where I had built this relationship with the court by going in and being a positive influence on the people around me, even though I was by the end of it back in the cannabis program, that there was still a lot of positive that could happen, and that was happening all around me, and that the things that I took to heart, my commitment to service and making myself available and helping the people who are still sick, get better and find what they need to find to get by until they can. That's what this whole drug testing effort is about because, dead people don't recover. And I didn't want to see any more people die. I'd had enough people die already. So he actually presented me with a certificate, and he thanked me for what I did. And to walk out of there a free man after all the trouble, after all the strife and the sacrifice and the difficulty, and people treated me like I was just a terrible human being, and I had not done anything morally awful to anybody. And I just felt like I didn't deserve it. And to have that validated by somebody whose opinion I probably couldn't be farther from, to come across the table and validate where I was at, and to apologize for that, I think that experience for me was transformative. It it empowered me to feel like I could get involved and that people could change how they view these things, and that people in the legal system could change how they deal with it, and that at the end of the day, we all wanted the same thing. The judge who was in that room, the prosecutor who was in that room, the cops that brought me in, the social worker upstairs who was trying to help me out, and all my fellow drug addicts. Like, nobody wanted people to die. Nobody wanted people to be in danger. Nobody wanted people to be hurt. And most of us were just trying to be well and to be happy. And I think when that realization dawned on me, when I realized how much more I had in common with these people, and 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 when they finally let down the resistance and just met me at a human level and just had dialogue with me and built a relationship with me, and then at the end of it finally validated me, like, it made me it's carried me through to where I am. where I feel like, you know what, I can work with these people, and I can do something about this. And whether you're people who do drugs or not, or whether you're people who work in law enforcement or not, or whether you're whatever it is, like we could come together and we could still reach like a common understanding about, what is just generally right for how you treat other people and be compassionate. And I think that a lot of these people wanted the same things. And as I've continued to do this work, that understanding's continued to be validated, to where like I had this really incredible experience where, I'm in the governor's task force and I'm presenting on a training with the new narcotics testing supplies that we wrote a law to create legal structure around. And I'm in the governor's task force training people how to use these things, how to test their drugs. And so I had a little pack that I made up. I don't know if I have it around here somewhere. But it was just a bag of sand with some tubs in it. Of course, I was being silly. So I go in there, and the captain of the state police, he's he's sitting there, and I'm at the front of the room. So I get introduced as the one of the founders of the Rhode Island Users Union, and of course I get into my demonstration. I'm pulling a bag out of my pocket. I'm like, okay, I get it. I know what you're all thinking because I probably thought this before I became a drug user. I would have thought the same thing. Here's this guy. He just told us he founded a drug users union. He's going to be testing some drugs, and oh my God, he's got a bag, right? So what is in this bag? And so I'm kind of playing with him a little bit. So I walk over to the captain of the state police and I drop my bag on his desk and I open it up. I'm like, well, this guy is the only other guy in the room who's got as much experience with this stuff as I probably do. So I'm going to come over to him and we're going to make sure together that everybody can stay safe. It's going to be a good deal. So then I start pulling the tubs out of the bag and I'm popping them on the table. And I'm like, oh, well, hold on a minute. Just before you get too excited, I wanted to make sure I brought the bottle with me, and I stick my bottle of Tums on the table in front of him. So I pull the Tums out, and of course, I have the little trifold pamphlet. It was printed on the glossy paper that I wanted for a good reason, because you can use it. Either you can tell somebody to use it as a snorter if they want to snort their drugs, or you can stick your drugs in it and crush them up, which is what I needed to do. So I crush these Tums up. I'm demonstrating to them how to break them down because one of the things that we wanted people to do was to break their drugs into a fine powder and distribute them across the substance to get like a really good representative sample on their test. And the other part of that was a thing called a chocolate chip cookie effect. I know a lot of folks in the cannabis community don't have to deal with this. Sometimes in the edibles, this does happen occasionally if they're not mixed well enough. You'll see pockets of oil where there's a more higher concentration of highly concentrated THC oil. If you're only eating like parts of your edible, then that has there is some potential for that to happen. So there is a little bit of scientific lesson here for the cannabis folks, but really it was more for like folks with fentanyl, really highly potent pockets of substances. We wanted to diminish the overall impact of those and then tell people to start small and start slow because that's going to reduce their risk for overdose. And so I'm demonstrating this whole thing and I'm crushing this pill up in front of the captain of the state police. And his eyes are out to here. He looks like he's a frog. It was so funny. And of course, the head of the pharmacist trade association, he's there taking pictures of the whole thing. He sends me on email. It was great. I might post those in the group if you guys ask for them. I'll be happy to share them with you. They're quite good. So and of course I have to go back to the front of the room because at this point I'm like I get very emotional about things. I've worked really hard to create a world where the things that made sense to me that were going to save lives and keep people like my girlfriend or my best friend or my other best friend or my other best friend or my other best friend, right? Like the score of people have died in my own life from like those things happening to other people and other people experiencing that. Um, and that's really what it all came back to was just wow, seeing people challenge their own assumptions and to have courage to take on these new roles. And I think that there's a lesson there for the cannabis community because if people are willing to challenge their assumptions there, and now because of the opiate crisis, people are starting to recognize cannabis as a pathway to exit problematic opiate use. Like we're starting to open a genuine dialogue where this is like not just like an alternate pathway to recovery, but we're like talking about like we've codified laws and mainstream this into recovery. So to think that we don't have a mainstream group to support each other is just bizarre, right? So I wanted to start this to create that, to have somewhere for that group to go to, because we're growing and there's going to continue to be more of us, and there's more of us out there right now that even we're aware of because there's so many. And as I've talked to people, over time in recovery, I've found more and more and more people that were using cannabis in recovery, just not talking about it because they were scared. And so part of this too is for me to come out publicly and to show people through my own example because of, being military trained and having that belief system. I very much believe in leading by example. We shouldn't have to be afraid of owning our recovery. When we start to let fear take root in our lives, that's when we get sick. So it's almost like, you have something that's working against your recovery right from the very beginning. And I want to start to dispel that for people and really start to create a healthy culture of just being health conscious as a patient, whether or not you're using cannabis, just being health conscious. And I think that's okay. I think that's okay for people to do. So that could keep you a full hour, but I definitely wanted to get on with you guys this week. I apologize about missing last week. The next few weeks are going to be really crazy. I got a whole bunch of stuff lined up. Tons of success has been happening. I'm heading down to New Orleans. I'm going to speak at Harvest Fest. Hopefully, I'll do a little bit of streaming from Harvest Fest and join you guys from there. That'll be really awesome. You guys get to meet a whole bunch of your fellow cannabis family and welcome people to join me on this forum then. And then from there, I'm doing New Orleans, come back from New Orleans, stopping in Arkansas with Wendy Love Edge from the Green Zone. She'll be kind enough to host me on another segment of her show to talk about the work that I've been doing, a lot of stuff I talked about today. And then from there, I come back, I have a short break, and then I'm out to Vegas to help the founder of the Students for Sensible Drug Policy with another film project. So it's just been one of those times in my life where, I feel like coming out in the open and being honest and just putting it all out there like I have been. There was initially some pushback, but the rewards that I've reaped at the other side of it far outweigh the risks. And at coming out the other side of that and having that courage, I would encourage other people to find ways to do it in their own lives, preferably, to do some kind of a CBA, figure out if there is some potential for it to backfire or go nuclear. Some cultures and some social environments are less accepting than others. Some states are still highly criminalized, so you have to be very careful. But what I will say is that, feel encouraged. Things are changing. Things have changed, and they continue to change. And the more science that we have, the more understanding that we share, the more change is going to continue to happen, and we're going to see more people getting better support, and getting better. And I think that we're going to turn a corner on the sickness in our society when we start to embrace ideas of just providing people with, basic consumer education rights and human rights. Um, and I think that's starting to happen, that we've started to create that structure. So continue to come here each week, leave me some comments, give me some things to talk about. I'd love to answer your questions. I'm very well versed in recovery and in medical cannabis, so please feel free, ask away. I love having research projects, so I'm more than happy to look for answers too. So I'll check in with you guys again shortly before this show next week, and thank you all for joining me. This is Cannabis Assisted Recovery.